Hi, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining me for this very important concept or hypothesis based on data, research, and the workings of what I observe clinically about the heart storm. This is something that is actually quite complex, but the implications of it are so serious, and the setup in terms of what is happening is now a very significant thing, because the heart storm, as I am talking about, is already occurring. What I'll be doing, if you're watching here on YouTube, you will get the first part of the presentation. Then it will be continued with people who are with me on the webinar. And so you'll be able to see the first bit, but sadly, if you hadn't registered, you won't be able to see the full presentation. But I'll be giving you an overview of this concept and this topic, because as I said, I think this is very, very relevant. So let's get started as I go through a number of slides. The COVID heart storm is critical to uncover secret scars on the heart. Now, as usual, in terms of the principles, it's a lethal combination: focused cell killing followed by inflammatory overreach leads to microscarring. And what I'll be focused on today is an overview of the heart storm, immune dysregulation as the primary trigger of this, the involvement of blood vessels and the associated heart damage, and then the implications of heart scarring and potential therapy options. One of the questions people always ask is, what's the point of talking about this if you are not giving solutions? Well, the reality is that you first have to understand before you can try and target. And that's the way that I would approach the science around COVID and the implications of the post pandemic period. Depending on where you are, I think that we are still in an epidemic in certain parts of the world. But let's just remind ourselves of some very basic principles. The COVID immune team is my way of dissecting down the principles with regards to what is happening in terms of COVID. You have here the monocytes, which I've called the tanks. Neutrophils are like the foot soldiers. They are not really the priority here, but these T cells, specifically CD8, in this case, I've called them more like a sniper rather than the Air Force. The B cells producing antibodies, and the natural killer cells are the Navy. And you have this whole overview of your immune team. But there's some unusual patterns that happen after COVID infections where a number of these get depleted, where you have overactivity of the macrophage. This is an important point for us to reflect on. That overactivity of the macrophage is central, in my view, to all aspects of COVID and the longer term implications of COVID as well. In terms of this premise about heart storm, you have to remember that the storm represents spike triggered autoimmune response mechanism. That's different from the cytokine storm. And the premise was that it was primarily a hypersensitivity response targeting ACE and ACE2 in the myocardium, leading to myocarditis. And this could then cause heart failure with associated chronic myocardial inflammation. That was the premise initially with regards to the heart storm, until a very, very important paper was shared. And again, this was shared from the Japanese in terms of identifying what were the characteristics with regards to unusual pathology in the heart. And they shared this work in terms of cardiac multiple microscars, an autopsy study. It's important to note that this is one of the first autopsy studies that had ever been done looking in detail at the heart. They only looked at 3 patients, but I knew once I saw the pathology that this was very, very important. in terms of what else is happening across the board. And what they found was multiple microscars, never been seen before, in the heart of those patients who died of cardiac arrest. What we would therefore presume, and they found this, they specifically, in this case, highlighted the fact that this was all three patients had histories of COVID booster vaccination, and only one of the three had COVID. So they definitely think this was related to the COVID booster vaccination. And this is the premise that I'm working on, that what is the mechanism that's around that, and what does it lead to in terms of heart damage when we look at what goes on. In order to understand this, I have highlighted two categories of immune cells. And this is how I'm helping to try and simplify the concepts. The two things I'm highlighting are the macrophage, which is the tank, and the CD8 lymphocyte, killer T cells. This is our sniper. The two in combination make an absolutely lethal problem, especially in regards to the heart and to some extent the brain, because this is what I'm realizing. Once you understand the pathology, it then helps you to understand a little bit more about why it's occurring. Now, when we look at the basics of the heart, this is its normal cross section. You have here a normal heart on the left, and these are the ventricles, the left and the right and the left ventricles. Then you have here the aorta, the pulmonary trunk, where it takes blood to and from the lungs. This is a cut section, and you can see the muscle is quite thick here. And there are some important principles about the electricity of the heart. This is what causes it to beat, that we'll have to go through for you to understand the significance of what we're talking about here. So the heart is a very unique organ, and it doesn't stop working. It just keeps going all the time. You would have heard about the heart in relation to specific things like cardiac heart attacks or myocardial infarction. And in this case, a blood vessel gets blocked, and then there is a big area of damage to this heart. In some people, it can lead to other complications, but for many people, they just have reduced heart function with a predisposition for other issues down the line. And this is large vessel disease in relation to the heart. But this is not the kind of scarring that we're talking about in terms of MMS or multiple microscars. We're looking at something completely different. In order to understand the implications, you also have to get a grasp of a little bit more of the science about how the heart works. It is a muscular organ, but it is controlled by electrical signals. It's very important. That's what causes your heart to beat so consistently. And when we look at the electrical conducting system in the heart, this is showing you the wiring. And this primarily, this bump here is the sinoatrial node. And this is where the electrical signal comes from about 70 times per minute. It fires an electrical signal, which goes slowly to here, this atrioventricular node. And there is a delay from the initial firing so that these atria contract first. Then the same signal continues on and gets these ventricles to contract. And you have all this wiring here that shows you that all parts of the heart are connected in one wiring system. This is critical to understand the mechanism of some of the unusual patterns with regards to arrhythmias that people get. The next part you have to understand outside of the heart is the principle of ACE2, angiotensin converting enzyme 2. This is what the virus uses to enter cells, and it does it quite well in the upper airways, and this is where it causes infection, and then it can infect the lungs, it can get into the bloodstream. But once it gets into the bloodstream, where does it go? It will primarily target organs that have high levels of ACE2. And so this is important for us to understand. And when we look at ACE2 here, you can see that in reality, ACE2 is expressed in the brain in terms of the esophagus here. A lot is expressed in the lungs, in the heart. And this is where you've got the link to heart attacks, heart failure, myocarditis, arrhythmias. It's expressed in the intestines. This is where we get some of the bacteriophage patterns that are inexistent. So small intestines, colon, liver as well, and kidney. So all of these organs can become targeted by the virus and critically the spike protein. Just remember the simple principle. It's not really the virus that is targeting ACE2, it's the spike protein. On the surface of the virus, it binds to ACE2 and gets into cells. Part of the question or part of the concern I had throughout the pandemic was the fact that spike protein binds to ACE2 anywhere in the body because it was a replica of the viral spike protein. Now, when it comes to the characteristics that the Japanese had found, I've got you an image that's not really to scale, but it's supposed to help you understand the principle of cardiac multiple microscars. What you have here is the heart, and wherever I have an arrow and you see these dots, these represents microscars, but this is not to scale. This is just largely throughout the heart in order to do damage to it. Now, in order to understand the scale of this, I think that we would have to go back to the paper. And this was very important for us to be able to understand what was going on. And when we looked at the paper and they studied in detail, wherever you see these gray spots, these are multiple tiny little scars that they see under the microscope. And all of these scars are potentially able to trigger arrhythmias or ectopic beats, and they're scattered all throughout the heart. It's important to note that they came to the conclusion in the paper that they were linked to specific blood vessels, and this is another image of what they found. All of these areas here that are lightish pink are scars all throughout the heart, tiny little scars that can all trigger abnormal electrical responses. We have never seen anything like it. And so some people will discount it and say it couldn't be related to vaccination. I think that is not based on the scientific approach. We don't have any other explanation at the moment. It is possible it could be COVID infection, but you would expect similar patterns in areas of the world that are low vaccinated. The point being is that we need lots more autopsies in order to make sense of this. So as we continue along with the principle, there are another few cells that we just need to go over for you to make sense of why, based on the research, I think these microscars are occurring. The first thing is the macrophage. These are immune cells. They are bigger than neutrophils, which are the pawns almost of the immune system. When they're circulating, they're called a monocyte. They can survive much longer, and critically, they can present antigens, meaning that if they come across a protein they've not seen before, they can trigger the immune system to target that protein. And when they're sitting or living in the liver, they're Kupffer cells. In the brain, they're microglial cells. In the lungs, they're alveolar macrophages. So these macrophages are an important part of how the body will function. Additionally, we have CD8 lymphocytes. Now, these are specialized cells, and this is what it looks like. They are killer cells, and they directly target infected cells. They're very precise, and they release special enzymes that punch holes in the cells that they're targeting. They can remember stuff, so meaning once they've been triggered, they persist. And they are critical in terms of autoimmunity and immune pathology. So that's the second cell that you need to be able to understand. The third piece of this puzzle, especially in relation to the heart, is called a pericyte. So the pericytes are essentially part of the blood flow. If you look at this image here, this is showing you a capillary. This is right to the one of the smallest blood vessels where you have exchange of oxygen. These are red blood cells here. And surrounding it is a pericyte. Now, in the brain, these pericytes go all the way around. But in other parts, not all organs have them. It's in the liver, it's in the heart, in the kidneys as well. They go mostly around and they help to regulate blood flow. So they help control blood flow in the heart tissue. They have high levels of ACE2. And this is why it's very important. Remember, that's the entry receptor for the virus. They help to repair vessels and deal with new vessel growth. They can sense inflammation and they can turn into fibrotic cells, causing micro scars. This is an essential piece of the puzzle to understand what is going on and why it is so important. So, those are the three cells: the macrophage, the CD8 lymphocyte, and pericytes in the heart that are dealing with blood flow. When we go a little later into the presentation, I'll help you to understand a bit more about the ECG and why the presentation of what's going to happen is going to be connected with measuring electrical signals. This is what a normal ECG looks like. This represents the P wave is atrial contraction, then ventricular contraction, and then ventricular repolarization. And all of this is one heartbeat, about 70 times a minute. We'll go through why I expect that to change over the next few years with regards to the heart. And it's going to be related to ectopic foci of irritability in the heart. We come across this all the time. And we oftentimes try and ablate these areas. So if people are having irregular beats coming from different parts of the heart, this is showing you how we then burn those areas away. So in strange way, you create a scar around it so that it doesn't continue to trigger responses. And this is to do with catheter ablation in the heart. So this is an important part of controlling arrhythmias, things like atrial fibrillation or ventricular ectopics. This strategy deals with extra electrical activity in the heart. That's where I think most of the problems are. And so when we come down to these cardiac micro scars, just in case you are just joining us, the premise is that throughout the heart, you're having all of these tiny little areas of scarring that they noticed in these patients, never been seen before. So this is new from the pandemic, and it only leaves two options, technically, not necessarily, but mostly two options. One is an elephant, and the other one is the infection. But this is an important point with regards to these tiny little areas. And so, in order to understand it, I have therefore used an analogy to help to try and make it make sense. The CD8 lymphocyte is the sniper. And what it's doing is firing specific bullets targeting ACE2 in the heart. And what follows afterwards is the problem. So you have two things happening. ACE2 on the pericyte is sniped by the CD8 lymphocyte. And then following on straight away is the macrophage firing the two together are the beast that we are facing. This is what I think fundamentally is the cause of microscarring in the heart. And this is what we will go through in some more detail. But that's the overview, the principle, the premise as to what we're doing. When you have a lethal combination with focused cell killing, with inflammatory overreach, you will get microscarring. And that microscarring comes with long-term heart consequences. The question is, will we be able to mitigate it? Right. Thank you for that's the first part ended. As I said, that for those people who are on YouTube, thank you very much for being with me. And for the webinar registrants, we're going to go on with the rest of the presentation, which will include looking at options that can be used to try and mitigate some of this damage. And so the for YouTube, I will say goodbye. We'll play a short outro. And for our other members, just stay with us and we will continue with the presentation.